Now, on the Ghanaian coast, where many of the slaves set off on their journeys of no return, the so-called slave castles are a vivid reminder of the barbarity of the practice. In 1997, UNESCO established 23 August as the International Day for the Remembrance of the slave trade and its abolition. The day was inspired by events of the night of August 22 to 23, 1791. On this night, men and women torn from Africa and sold into slavery revolted against the slave system in the present-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic, demanding freedom and independence. The uprising set forth events that eventually led to the abolition of the slave trade. Haiti's independence in 1804 is also one born out of a successful slave uprising. The day aims to memorialize millions of people who were victims of transatlantic slave trade, one of the most frightening chapters in the history of humankind. Each year, the UN invites people all over the world, including educators, students and artists, to organize events that center on the theme of this day. Well, to talk about this and more, we're now joined by researcher and musician, Dr. Sello Galane. Thank you so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thanks, Brother Peter. It's a great honor to be part of this great day of, memorializing the end of slavery in the world.
What comes to mind for you when you think about this day?
Well, a number of things, really. This day, it's actually symbolized right on the island of Goree, by a very interesting symbol, a symbol of a man and a woman with broken chains standing on top of a drum. It's a very interesting point how the drum is actually linked to both the slavery as well as the freedom of, the slaves that were kept on the island of Goree. Imagine that they were taken. I was fortunate to have been on the border of Badagry in Nigeria, where the last ship that had come to collect the last, set of slaves is still standing there because slavery was abolished. At the time, it was at the harbor to come and take the last set of slaves, and the community around Badagry in Nigeria that was, supposed to leave, the generations later are still there. And I had an opportunity further to go around into Senegal itself, and then went to the island of Goree to actually be on that ship, ship, the route that took us to the island itself, to really go through room to room. And we're lucky we're taken through by, a tour guide that took Nelson Mandela through. His name is Colonel. And Colonel, great narrator, who then showed us all the rooms where the slaves were kept, but more is the doorway of no return, where all slaves, out of 12.5 million slaves that were taken through, and about 10 million made it, 2.5 died, over the seas. Either, they were packed like sardines in a tin. And what was more important is that once they got sick, they were just thrown out, to be eaten by the sharks. And the same happened with the doorway of no return. A doorway of no return, it's where everybody who was not well, because everybody was sold from the I'm bringing Robben Island now, from the island of Goree to the Americas, to Europe. If you were sick, you were thrown out. If you revolted, you were thrown out for the sharks to eat you up down there. So I was on that doorway of no return. What I said, impression there. The statue behind it there, you will see I'm standing somewhere there with Brother Hot Sticks Mabuse when we were both on the island. it's written La Statute de la Libération de l'Esclavage, which then means, therefore, that is a statute for the liberation and the end of slavery. And on the island itself, you can see the guns, the cannons that were brought, because both the Greeks, the Portuguese, the English, the French, the Dutch fought for the island, because it was where all the slaves were kept before they could be shipped to other parts of the world as slaves, sold. So those guns were later used by an elite, Greek, soldiers to shoot a movie, the guns of Navarone. Those cannons are still there, where Gregory Peck and David Niven and Anthony Quinn shot the guns of Navarone. Those cannons are still on the island, because these are the cannons that were used when both the British, when the French, the Dutch, were fighting over the island. And one ship full of slaves went down, called Tacoma. As you go there, all the ship, that takes you from the inland of Senegal to Goree, take you through that place where Tacoma and Debbie, sank with a full team of all the Africans that were taken of slavery on the island. And there's a small room there with no window. When you seem to revolt, because you see that the slave masters are molesting the young girls, and you raise your head, or you give an expression that you disapprove, you are locked in that room. You can't stand in that room. You sit there. The original colors have been maintained. And when I saw it, and I was told that Nelson Mandela went in there and sat down and got out there completely disturbed, because you can imagine how tall he was. But the room is very, very small, and you can't even kneel when you are in there, because it is really small. So the island and slavery, they really are a violation of human rights in a supreme way ever possible. So those years, 1526 to 1867, thereabout, give us about 341 years of slavery that shall not, may not, should not be forgotten.
As you were talking, I remember the movie Guns of Navarone, but I also had the opportunity to visit Elmina Castle in Cape Coast in Ghana. And
yes.
What you say about the size of these rooms, these prisons where these slaves were kept before they were shipped out, they are tiny, tiny, and yet they were packed, as you said, like sardines. And it is quite a disturbing feeling to actually go into these castles and just think about what went on for more than 3 centuries.
Indeed, slaves were packed literally one on top of the other. And you can imagine, moving all the way from Nigeria, all the way from Ghana, all the way to the island of Goree, where, slaves would defecate, on themselves. Some would just wet themselves, and those who survived, were taken through. Those who died were thrown out, were without any food, without any water. That beautiful picture where Brahot Sticks, Mabuse and I are standing next to that statue of Liberation. That is the Statue of Liberty, standing on top of a drum right on the island of Goree. Just in front of us, you would then have big baobab trees that majestically stand there to affirm that you are indeed on the African soil, and yet it feels like you are indeed in in a world somewhere, just a world of slavery. The black rocks you see there are the stones on that plaque are Bazun rock, Bazun stone that have been used to make the entire island, the buildings on the island, including the surface where we walk on the island. It's a very, very sad feeling when you walk there, because you really cannot imagine an island so small that it could keep so many soldiers, slaves right there. And much later on, when I got back home, and I could imagine, 3,000 feet, which is 900 meters in length, and the small island sheltered by Cape Verde Peninsula, now part of the city of Dakar. It is this island that has kept all our people in their small rooms that are built in the shape of the same ships that brought them to the island of Goree. So when I wrote the song, Nyepe on Goree, Nyepe, 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 Nyepe we Nyepe, we Nyepe, Nyepe were brown beans that were fed to the slaves on the island because they ate nothing else but Nyepe. So I wrote this song, which had to have the two words, Nyepe and Goree, and the doorway of no return. You can see those pictures there. What you see is the marketplace of slaves, those that were taken, and the tall ones that survived were the Mandingo. The Mandingos made it. They were very strong, they were very tall, and these fetched quite high prices on the market. You can imagine those young girls when they got pregnant and got children when they themselves were babies. Those children were now taken to the to the inland of Senegal to work as maids. Were not available for pricing simply because they were children of the slave masters themselves and the slaves. So all this dehumanization that happened on this island, we who run governments of Africa today must look back at what happened and say never and never again shall we subject our people in any way akin to what the slaves themselves did. As you can see there, to be sold and let the slaves, African people, put on the island of Goree. Some since went down with the ship of Tacoma and Debbie that went down with a full load of slaves. 341 years of slavery, but more pointed is the island of Goree, where there was that doorway of no return, no steps, nothing. It's just a door. You look out, you see the sea. If you protest, you just push through, you go down into the sea that turned red because of the blood of our mothers, our blood of our sisters, our fathers, our brothers. Said indeed, never and never again. Should we allow this to happen?
Never and never again. I totally agree with you. And I think that there are lessons that we can learn, because the slave trade actually could not have existed without the help of some Africans, fellow Africans. And that was part of the tragedy, wasn't it?
It was part of the tragedy. When I got to, like I say, when I got to Badagry, you see the sad faces of 2 generations to 3 generations of the people who were brought there, some by their own brothers, who cooperated with the slave masters to sell their brothers out, to sell their mothers and sisters out. So you walk into Badagry, you see almost stony dead faces of people who had given up, that they were also taken away, were going to be taken away. So it is a sad indictment on part of some of our own people who really collaborated. You get to see it there, and you get to see it as well in Ghana, and you get to see it well in Togo. You get to see it when you go all the way around to Senegal itself, and you're able to go on the island of Goree, because then you still have communities that live on that island of Goree that are surviving on paintings, that are surviving. I mean, the island has for years had no drinkable water, you know, so you can imagine the island surrounded by, you know, the sea, salty sea. And that's when I was looking at that, I asked myself this question, whether as we take over as African governments and we look at what happened to our own, whether we are indeed fit to fit our foot in this formidable fight, fueled in flight from far by foreign forces into this, our fatherland, that let our conscience be our guide and forge forward for freedom. For freedom will falter and flop in the footprints of the folly. Let the grain that grows on the grieving ground grow some good, because the shawl and the shroud of the shrunken and shriveled up tree of liberty that stands and grows in the garbage and the gutters in the ghettos. So let us allow that our footprints that we have made, footprints we make with tips of our toes and footprints we make with gallant strides, these footprints shall never be forgotten, whichever way we look at it.